She lay bleeding in the snow abandoned, until a ruthless mafia boss saved a broken single mom. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Sarah Mitchell had never thought of herself as unlucky. She was a single mom, doing her best to juggle her life, working long shifts at a local diner just to make ends meet. But that night, her life would change in a way she could never have imagined. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, covering the world in a blanket of white. The cold bit at her skin as she trudged through the empty streets, her breath coming in quick, shallow puffs. She had just finished her shift and was walking to her car, hoping to get home to her son, Liam, before it got too late. But the night had other plans. The icy road beneath her feet gave way as she slipped, crashing onto the pavement with a sickening thud. Pain exploded in her side, and she gasped, unable to catch her breath. The world around her seemed to blur as the cold seeped into her bones, and for a moment, she thought she might pass out. She tried to push herself up, but the pain in her ribs was unbearable. She looked around, but there was no one in sight. It was just her, the cold, and the snow. As she lay there, struggling to breathe, the sound of a car engine rumbled in the distance. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the street in an eerie glow. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the car came closer, but it didn't stop. It sped past her, leaving her in the snow. She blinked, confusion clouding her thoughts. Was it possible they hadn't seen her? The pain in her side intensified, and she felt a wave of panic. But then, the car stopped. The engine cut off, and the sound of footsteps approaching made her stomach turn. She could hardly focus, but she could make out the silhouette of a man moving toward her. He was tall, his dark coat blending into the night, but it was the way he walked that made her freeze. His every step radiated power, a kind of quiet authority that made her feel small in comparison. The man stopped in front of her, his shadow looming over her. His eyes locked on hers, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unsettling about him, something dangerous. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep, the accent unfamiliar, but there was no mistaking the edge of authority in his tone. Sarah tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The cold was too much, and the pain was overwhelming. She opened her mouth, but her vision blurred, and everything went dark. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the snow. The cold was gone, replaced by warmth. Her head was resting on something soft, and the sound of faint murmurs filled the air. She tried to sit up, but a strong hand gently pushed her back down. "Don't try to move." It was the man from the street. He was standing over her now, his expression unreadable. He was close, too close. His eyes searched hers, scanning her face for signs of distress. He looked at her as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You're safe now," he said quietly. Sarah blinked, still disoriented, and tried to speak, but the words felt heavy in her mouth. "Who are you?" she finally managed. He leaned in slightly, his face just inches from hers. "I'm the man who saved you," he replied, his voice soft but firm. The words echoed in her mind, but the intensity in his gaze made it clear that there was more to him than just a simple act of kindness. Sarah didn't know who this man was, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was never going to be the same again. Sarah's eyes fluttered open again, and this time, she wasn't met with the cold sting of snow or the aching pain from her fall. She was lying on a soft, warm bed, and the smell of expensive cologne lingered in the air around her. She tried to sit up, but the same strong hand from earlier gently pressed her back down. "Easy now." The man's voice came again, calm and steady. His presence was overwhelming, like he filled every corner of the room without even trying. The room was dimly lit, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows, blocking out the city lights. The decor was elegant, too elegant for someone like her. She could tell just by the feel of the place. Luxury surrounded her. She didn't belong here. As her senses slowly came back to her, the events from the night before rushed back. The pain in her side, the snow, the feeling of helplessness, and then the man. Her heart raced, panic seizing her chest. She looked up at him, her eyes still hazy, but there was no mistaking the intensity in his gaze. He stood over her, watching her carefully, but not with malice. No, there was something different in his eyes, something that made her freeze in place. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a man who commanded attention, whose every movement seemed deliberate and calculated. What? What happened? She whispered, her voice hoarse. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her once more. You were hurt, he said simply, his tone surprisingly gentle. He reached for a glass of water on the nightstand and handed it to her. Drink. She hesitated, unsure of what to make of the situation, but thirst won out. She took the glass, her hands shaking slightly as she brought it to her lips. The cool water soothed her dry throat, and for a moment, she felt some semblance of normalcy return. But the questions flooded her mind again. Who was this man? Why was she here? Why had he helped her? She tried to push herself up again, but the pain in her side stopped her. She glanced at him, her mind racing. Who are you? She asked, her voice a little stronger now. He didn't seem to be in a rush to answer. Instead, he studied her with the same intensity that had unsettled her from the moment they met. A man who owes you a debt, he replied, his voice low and controlled. She frowned, confused. A debt? You were in trouble, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. I saved you. That's all you need to know for now. His words were direct, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something about him, something dangerous, and it unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She didn't know what to say, so she just stared at him, trying to piece things together. The world outside felt distant, almost unreal. She was trapped in a room with a man she didn't know, a man who seemed to have an answer for everything but nothing she could understand. Thank you, she said finally, her voice quiet but sincere. For saving me. He gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. Don't thank me yet, he replied. You're not out of danger. She blinked at him, her confusion deepening. Danger? He didn't elaborate, only turned toward the door. Rest. We'll talk later. With that, he left her alone in the room, the weight of his words lingering in the air long after he was gone. Sarah sat there, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. She was safe for now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something she wasn't prepared for. In the quiet of the room, she could hear her heart pounding in her chest, and despite the comfort of the bed, a sense of unease settled deep within her. The man who had saved her, Dominic Romano, wasn't just anyone. He was a force, a presence she couldn't ignore, and the world he was about to pull her into was one that was far from the life she had known. She couldn't escape it, not now. But maybe, just maybe, she could survive it. Sarah didn't know how much time had passed before Dominic returned, but it felt like hours. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. Her mind was still reeling from the strange and unsettling circumstances that had brought her here. She sat up, the pain in her side still present, but less severe now. As she gingerly stood, trying to keep her balance, she found that the world around her felt distant. It felt as if she were trapped in a dream, unsure of what was real. The soft light that filtered in from the windows painted the room with an eerie calmness, but it did little to ease the anxiety creeping up her spine. Her body was still tense from the unfamiliar situation. Just then, the door creaked open, and Dominic stepped in. He was dressed in the same dark, tailored suit, his posture commanding, and his presence immediately filled the room. His dark eyes swept over her, his gaze lingering briefly on her healing side. He didn't speak at first, just studied her with the same intensity that made her heart skip. Sarah could feel the weight of his scrutiny, and it unsettled her. How are you feeling? He asked finally, his voice low and steady. Better, she replied, though her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. She wasn't sure if better was the right word, but it was the best she could manage. She didn't feel better. She didn't feel anything close to normal. I don't understand what's happening, she said, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to steady herself. You're safe, Dominic said, his tone almost reassuring. But Sarah wasn't sure how much she could trust those words. She was safe, but at what cost? Why did you bring me here? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. You don't owe me anything, she continued, the confusion evident in her voice. Dominic regarded her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. There was a coldness to him that sent a shiver down her spine, but there was something else in his eyes, a depth of understanding, as if he could see things she wasn't even aware of yet. "You don't owe me either," he said quietly. "I didn't do this for you. I did it because I had to." His words hung in the air, heavy and enigmatic. Sarah blinked, trying to process them. "Had to?" "Yes," he said, his gaze intense. "You were in danger, and it's my responsibility to keep you safe." Sarah frowned, still trying to wrap her head around what he was saying. "Danger from what?" "From you," she asked, the words sharp. Dominic's lips barely twitched into something that resembled a smile, but there was no humor in it. "No," he said simply. "From a world you don't belong to." Sarah felt a cold chill spread through her. His words were like a warning, something far beyond what she could understand. She had no idea what world he was referring to, but the way he said it made it clear that it was something dangerous. "You're not the only one who's been watching," Dominic continued, his tone shifting slightly. "There are people who know you, who know what you've seen, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what he was talking about, but the dread that settled in her chest was unmistakable. "I didn't see anything," she whispered, almost pleading. "I didn't hear anything." Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, though his expression remained serious. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "But I need you to understand something. You're not safe here. Not yet." His words were chilling. Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back to the life she had before. She was stuck now, in a world she didn't understand, with a man she couldn't trust. She didn't know who Dominic Romano was, but she knew he was a part of something much bigger and far more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. She looked at him, her mind a whirlwind of questions, but for once, she stayed silent. Dominic stepped back slightly, as if giving her space to breathe, but his presence still loomed large in the room. "Rest," he said quietly. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Sarah nodded, though she didn't know what there was to say. Everything she thought she knew was slipping away, piece by piece. She had no choice but to stay in this strange, dangerous world, for now. But she couldn't help wondering if she would ever make it out of this alive. The next day, Sarah woke up to the sound of soft voices drifting in from the hallway. She wasn't sure how long she had slept, but it wasn't long enough. The warmth of the bed around her was a stark contrast to the cold reality she had been thrust into. She had been living her life on the edge for years, juggling work and motherhood, but now, everything had changed. Dominic's presence weighed heavily on her, and no matter how much she tried to ignore it, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in his world. She pushed herself out of bed, her muscles still sore from the fall, and made her way toward the window. She drew back the heavy curtains, revealing a city skyline that seemed so distant, so alien to her. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the buildings. She felt small, isolated, as if she didn't belong here. The room she was in wasn't hers. The life she had known was slipping further away with each passing moment. She turned away from the window, her eyes landing on the closed door. She knew Dominic was on the other side. She could feel his presence even without seeing him. The thought of facing him again made her stomach turn. But she had no choice. She had to understand what was happening, and the only person who could explain it was him. With a deep breath, Sarah walked toward the door and hesitated for a moment before opening it. The hallway was empty, but she could hear muffled voices from somewhere farther down. She stepped out, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. She wasn't sure where to go, but she followed the voices, hoping they would lead her to him. As she turned a corner, she saw him standing near the large dining table, talking to a man she hadn't seen before. Dominic's back was to her, but she could tell that he was in control of the situation. There was an air of authority around him, and the way the man across from him shifted uncomfortably only reinforced that. She stopped in her tracks, unsure of whether she should interrupt. Dominic must have sensed her presence because he turned his head slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. He nodded toward the empty chair at the table. "Join us, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Sarah hesitated, but she didn't have the luxury of refusing. She moved toward the table, her heart pounding in her chest. As she sat down, the other man gave her a quick, curious glance before focusing his attention back on Dominic. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah, Dominic began, his eyes never leaving hers. This is Luca. He's one of the few I trust in this business. Luca was younger than Dominic, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and a sharp, angular face. His eyes were cold, calculating, and he studied Sarah like a puzzle he was trying to figure out. "Nice to meet you," he said, his voice smooth but lacking warmth. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure how to react to either of them. "We have a problem," Dominic continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more serious. "There are people looking for you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected that. She thought she had been brought here for protection, but now it seemed like she was caught in the middle of something much bigger. "I'm not involved in anything," she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know anything about your business." Dominic's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You don't have to know anything, Sarah. What matters is that you've seen things you shouldn't have. And now, they know you've seen them." Sarah's mind raced. She didn't know what he was talking about. What had she seen? What had she overheard that was so important? Dominic reached for a folder on the table and slid it toward her. "This is a list of people who might be looking for you," he said, his voice lowering. "People who don't take kindly to being exposed." Sarah felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. She opened the folder and began to flip through the pages, each one filled with names and photographs of people she didn't know. But one name caught her eye. Petrov. She recognized it from the conversation the night before, the one she had overheard. The thought of those people coming after her was terrifying. "I never wanted any of this," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to live a normal life, raise my son." Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, but there was still that edge of coldness beneath it. "Normal is a luxury for people who don't know what's at stake. But you're in this now, whether you like it or not." Sarah closed the folder, her hands shaking. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice filled with frustration and fear. Dominic leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I want you to stay safe. And for that to happen, I need your trust." Sarah looked at him, unsure of how to respond. Trust? How could she trust someone like him? But at the same time, she knew she had no other choice. She was in too deep now. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" she asked, her voice soft. Dominic's lips twitched into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You don't." Sarah sat in the dimly lit room, her mind still reeling from everything that had happened. It was hard to focus on anything other than the weight of Dominic's words. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, and now she was stuck. Stuck with him. Stuck in his world. But what choice did she have? Her son was counting on her, and she had no way out. Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "You'll be staying here for the time being," he said, his tone calm but firm. Sarah looked up at him, trying to gauge his mood. She had learned by now that his calm exterior hid something more dangerous. "For how long?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "Until I know you're safe," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "But you'll need to follow my rules while you're here. No one can know you're here, and no one can know what you've seen." Sarah nodded slowly, still trying to digest everything he was saying. She didn't want to be a part of this world, but it seemed like it was already too late. "I understand," she said quietly. "But what about my son? I need to see him." Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, but there was no warmth in his gaze. "Your son is safe," he said, his voice low and controlled. "He's being taken care of. But right now, you need to focus on staying out of sight. The people who are looking for you are dangerous." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she thought about her son. Liam was all she had left. She had to protect him, no matter what it took. "I need to know he's okay," she said, her voice shaking with worry. Dominic stepped forward, his expression serious. "He's fine, Sarah," he said softly. "I promise you, no one will harm him. But you need to trust me." Trust. The word echoed in her mind. She wanted to trust him, but how could she? He was a mafia boss, a man whose world she didn't belong in. He was offering her safety, but at what cost? "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic didn't react immediately. He just watched her, his gaze unreadable. After a long pause, he spoke. "I understand your hesitation," he said quietly. "But the truth is, I'm the only one who can protect you now. And I'm the only one who can protect your son." His words were chilling, but she couldn't deny the truth in them. He was right. She had no one else. Fine, she said, her voice barely audible. I'll stay, but I need to see Liam. Dominic nodded, his expression hardening. I'll arrange it, but you'll need to stay here until it's safe. Sarah didn't argue. She knew it was the only choice she had. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Dominic didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. Before he left, he paused and glanced back at her. Rest, he said, his voice softer now. I'll be back later. As the door closed behind him, Sarah was left alone in the room, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her chest. She had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever. And no matter how much she wanted to escape, she knew she was trapped in a world of power, danger, and secrets. The only thing that mattered now was keeping her son safe, even if it meant staying with Dominic for as long as it took. Sarah spent the next few hours in a haze, her mind struggling to make sense of everything. The room she was in felt both foreign and oddly comforting. The soft fabrics, the quiet elegance of the space, and the stillness in the air seemed to mock the chaos that had invaded her life. Dominic had given her space to rest, but the unease never left her. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She tried to focus on her son, Liam, imagining his face and the warmth of his small hands holding hers. She had promised him she would protect him, but now it seemed like her world was slipping further from her control. She had no idea what Dominic's world involved, but she was caught in it now, whether she liked it or not. The soft click of the door broke her train of thought, and she sat up quickly. Dominic entered the room, his presence filling the space like always. He looked at her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. You need to come with me, he said, his voice calm yet firm. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Why? Where are we going? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. Dominic didn't immediately answer. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him. The look on his face told her it was important, and that she had no choice. She got up from the bed, her legs slightly unsteady from the hours of rest. She followed him down a long hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. The further they walked, the more Sarah felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had no idea what was coming next, but Dominic's serious demeanor made her feel like she was walking into something dangerous. They reached the end of the hall, and Dominic opened a door, revealing a small, sterile-looking office. He stepped inside, motioning for Sarah to do the same. She hesitated for a moment, but then stepped in, her heart racing. The room was filled with expensive furniture, a large desk at the center of the space. The walls were lined with shelves, books neatly arranged on them. But it wasn't the books that caught her attention. It was the man sitting behind the desk. He was older than Dominic, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp, calculating look in his eyes. He looked up as they entered, his expression hardening as his gaze fell on Sarah. This is Sarah, Dominic said, his tone flat. She's the one I told you about. The man behind the desk nodded, his eyes never leaving Sarah. I'm glad you're here, he said, his voice low and commanding. I wish it were under better circumstances. Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Dominic, who gave a subtle nod. This is Victor Petrov, Dominic said, his voice measured. He's someone who can help you. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had heard it before, in the conversations she had overheard. It was the name of someone dangerous, someone tied to a world of crime and power. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't want anything to do with this, she said, her voice shaking. Victor leaned forward, his expression softening just slightly. You don't have a choice, Sarah, he said, his voice calm but firm. You're already involved. And now, you need protection. Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. She didn't want to be involved in any of this. She just wanted to go home, to her son, and forget this nightmare. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't that simple. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. What I want is simple, he said, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. I want you to stay safe. And I want you to trust Dominic. He's the only one who can protect you now. Sarah looked at Dominic, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. Trust him, she whispered. Dominic didn't flinch. He simply met her gaze with the same intensity he always had. "You have no choice," he said quietly. "I'm the only one who can keep you safe." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know if she could trust him, but in this moment, she didn't have a choice. Her life was in their hands now. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll stay, but only if it means keeping my son safe." Victor smiled slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "That's all I need to hear," he said. "Now let's get to work." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The reality of her situation was sinking in, and there was no turning back now. She was caught in a world she didn't understand, and the only way out was through it. And with Dominic and Victor standing by her side, she had no choice but to play along, no matter how dangerous it might be. The next few days felt like a blur for Sarah. Her world had been turned upside down, and she found herself struggling to keep up. She had tried to hold on to the life she knew, the life she had with her son, but now everything was shifting. Dominic's world, the one she had been thrust into, was a world she didn't understand. The more she saw, the more she realized just how dangerous it was. But as much as she wanted to resist, there was no escaping it. Dominic's words echoed in her mind, and she knew deep down that she had no choice. She was stuck. That afternoon, as Sarah sat in the quiet room Dominic had given her, the door opened, and he stepped in. His presence always seemed to fill the space, commanding attention without even trying. He looked at her for a moment, as if assessing her, before speaking. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm. But there was something in his tone that made her uneasy. Sarah stood up, her stomach tightening. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice low and serious. "You're still being watched." The words hit her like a punch. She had known, deep down, that the danger wasn't over, but hearing it from him made it all too real. "Who's watching me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. "People who want to silence you," he replied simply. Sarah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into, but she knew now that there was no turning back. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic reached out, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "You stay here out of sight. We'll take care of it," he said, his voice reassuring, but there was an edge to it that made her nervous. "I can't stay here forever," Sarah replied, her mind still racing. "I need to get back to my son. I can't keep hiding." Dominic's expression softened, but only slightly. "We're doing everything we can to keep him safe," he said quietly. "But you're not going anywhere until this is over. It's too dangerous." Sarah's heart ached. She had spent so much time trying to keep her son safe, but now, it felt like she was the one in danger. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she couldn't run away from it. "Not now." "What's going to happen?" she asked, her voice small. Dominic's eyes flickered with something that might have been sympathy, but it was quickly masked by his usual stoic expression. "You'll stay here. I'll take care of the rest." Sarah didn't know what that meant, but it didn't matter. She had no choice. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, and she had to trust him. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Dominic nodded, his gaze softening for just a moment before he turned and walked toward the door. "Rest," he said, glancing back at her. "I'll handle things." Sarah stood there for a moment, watching him leave, and then she let out a long, shaky breath. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As much as she hated it, she was part of this world now, and the only way out was through. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked back to the bed. The weight of the uncertainty ahead settled in her chest, but there was no turning back. For better or worse, her life had become entangled with Dominic's, and she could only hope that it wouldn't destroy everything she cared about. The following days were a blur for Sarah as she adjusted to the strange new life that had been forced upon her. Each day bled into the next, with Dominic's presence ever looming over her. The mansion was cold, sterile, and filled with the hum of something dangerous beneath the surface. She had stayed hidden, as Dominic had insisted, though every part of her wanted to break free. He had kept his promise to keep Liam safe, but the price of that safety was the price of her freedom. Dominic came to her room every evening, bringing news, updating her on the situation, but mostly, he remained distant. There was a cold professionalism to his demeanor, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was a wall he had built around himself, or if it was just who he was. One evening, Sarah was standing by the large windows, looking out over the sprawling grounds when she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Dominic's presence was always unmistakable. He stopped behind her, his shadow falling across the floor. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice quiet, but with an edge to it that made Sarah tense. "I'm fine," she replied, her back still to him. She didn't turn around. She couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of everything that had happened. She wanted to trust him, but the more time she spent in his world, the more questions she had. "You don't look fine," he said. She finally turned to face him. There was something in his eyes, something that made her feel like he could see right through her. "What do you want from me, Dominic?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly, though she tried to keep it steady. Dominic didn't answer immediately. He took a step toward her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I told you before," he said, his tone soft, yet firm. "I want to keep you safe. But I can't do that if you keep fighting me." Sarah swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not fighting you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if I can trust you. You've kept me hidden here, isolated, and I don't even know who the hell you really are." Dominic's expression hardened. He didn't like that she had said the words out loud, but Sarah didn't care. She had to say it. She had to get it out. "I'm trying to protect you," he said slowly, his voice almost too calm. "And you're pushing me away." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not pushing you away," she said, her voice trembling. "But I can't live like this. I can't just hide forever. I need to see my son. I need to know he's okay." Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a brief second. "You're not ready," he said quietly. "You're not ready to know the full extent of what's going on." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "What do you mean, not ready?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the door, pausing just before he left the room. He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "I'll let you see your son," he said, his voice low. "But you have to trust me. Trust that I'm doing this for your own safety." Sarah wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she couldn't trust him, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had no other choice. Dominic was her only lifeline, whether she liked it or not. "Fine," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "But I need to see him soon. I need to know that he's okay." Dominic nodded, his expression softening ever so slightly. "I'll make sure of it," he said, and then he left, closing the door behind him. Sarah stood there for a moment, the silence pressing in on her. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that everything would be okay. She didn't know if she could keep hiding in this gilded cage, waiting for the day when Dominic would tell her it was safe. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stay in this world forever. The danger was real. The secrets were real. And she had no idea how much more she could take. Sarah sat in the room, her hands trembling as she waited. It had been a week since Dominic had promised she could see Liam, and yet, nothing had changed. The days had blurred together, each one feeling the same as the last, trapped in this strange house, surrounded by strangers and secrets. She could still feel the weight of the promise hanging over her. Dominic's words echoed in her mind. "Trust me." But how could she trust him when everything about this world felt like a lie? She needed answers. And she needed to see her son. It was the only thing keeping her going. The soft click of the door broke through her thoughts, and Sarah looked up. It was Dominic, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was something different in his eyes. He looked almost uncertain. "It's time," he said simply. "You can see your son now." Her heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice shaky with emotion. Dominic's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Follow me," he said, his tone firm. Sarah stood quickly, her legs weak beneath her, but the excitement of seeing Liam gave her the strength to move. They walked down the long hallway in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Sarah's mind raced. What would she find? Would Liam be the same? Would he even recognize her after all this time? She had no idea what to expect. They reached a door at the end of the hall, and Dominic stopped. "He's inside," he said, his hand resting on the doorknob. Sarah hesitated, her hand shaking as she reached for the door. She paused for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. She had waited for this moment for so long, and now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. With a deep breath, she opened the door. The room was small, cozy even, with soft lighting and a comfortable-looking bed in the center. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Liam, her son. He was looking down at his hands, but when he heard the door open, his head snapped up. His eyes widened in recognition, and for a moment, Sarah was frozen. He looked different, taller, older, but his eyes were the same bright blue eyes that she had missed so much. "Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her, as if unsure whether or not she was real. But then, slowly, he stood up and took a tentative step toward her. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, but filled with so much emotion that it broke her heart. Without thinking, Sarah rushed toward him, her arms wrapping around him tightly. She felt his warmth, his little body pressed against hers, and she closed her eyes, savoring the feeling of finally holding him again. "I'm here, Liam," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She felt him cling to her, his small hands gripping her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear again. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Nothing in the world could compare to the feeling of having her son in her arms again. "I missed you so much," Sarah whispered, kissing the top of his head. "I'm sorry it took so long." Liam pulled back slightly, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Why are we here, Mom? Why didn't we go home?" Sarah's heart ached at the question. She didn't have an answer for him. She didn't have an answer for herself. "It's complicated, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair out of his face. "But you're safe now. That's all that matters." Liam didn't seem fully convinced, but he nodded anyway. Sarah could see the worry in his eyes, and it tore her apart. She wanted to take him away from all of this, to run and never look back. But the reality was, she couldn't. Not yet. Not until the danger was gone. Dominic stepped into the room, his presence once again filling the space. "You have to stay here for now," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "But I'll make sure you're both taken care of." Sarah looked at him, her gaze hardening. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "As long as it takes," he said, his tone firm. Sarah nodded, her mind still racing. She couldn't stay here forever, but for now, this was where she had to be. For Liam. And for herself. The silence that followed felt heavy, but Sarah was content in the moment. She had her son, and as long as she had him, she could survive anything. Even this.